Hello. Sorry for the delay. I was out due to bad health and some travel. But welcome back. I'll try to keep this as in continuation as much as I can. And today we'll be talking about AL debugging in Business Central. Now, this has been asked quite a few times, so I thought let's cover that. So, if you're watching this as soon as possible, and if I miss something, just let me know and I'll surely try to add it. Before we begin, just a humble request, if you can subscribe to the channel, that'll be great. We'll keep talking about Business Central as we do, and we'll try to add as much content based on your feedback that I receive. Okay, so let's talk about debugging in Business Central. We'll try to cover all the scenarios, and I'll try to cover on-prem and SaaS. And for that, what I have is a Business Central on-prem environment and a Business Central SaaS environment. So we'll try to cover as much as we can. So to begin with, let's start with Visual Studio Code. And the first thing that we're going to cover is that there is an error message and I don't have the source code of any extension that's needed. So what you do in that case and how you debug your issue is what we are going to cover today. So first, let's get started with and let's create our first project, which happens with ALGo. Let's keep it in the default path, and let's say I'm targeting 11. It automatically creates a hello world file, and let's try doing on-prem. Okay. Now, before we get into on-prem, let's talk about some of the settings which are important when you're talking about on-prem. And for that, let's go into our custom setting.config, which is a file that you get on your on-prem installation. Remember, as we have talked about in past, you should never change this file manually. Always use PowerShell to change settings into it. If you haven't watched that video should be in the other playlist about services, service management and all. Do watch that. So for debugging, there are certain things that you need to remember in this configuration file. One is your development service port, which by default is set to 7049. But if you have multiple services, you might have changed this. And this is important because this will be required during debugging. So make sure that you know what your development service port is. Then there are some settings around debugging. I will talk about others in a while, but okay, you need to make sure that the debugging allowed is set to true. Sometime during installation you might not set this, and so you need to make sure that this setting is set to true. And that's it. This is just for the normal debugging. We'll come on other debugging as we go forward. So your debugging allowed should be true, and your development service port is something that you need to remember. Okay. Once both of them are set, for any kind of project, we will require some symbols to kind of operate on it, right? So let's try to set this up for my local host. Okay, on-prem server. I'll give my service name. If you are using a different port, then you will have to specify the port manually here. This is not a setting that comes by default, and then the authentication becomes Windows for me. Whatever is yours, you can choose that. And then let's do the download symbols. Now what download symbol does, we all know, we have talked about in past. It downloads the references of all the extension from Microsoft or any other that I have specified in the dependency section here. Now this is a configuration of type launch, which tells it that this configuration will be used to launch the client when somebody tries to publish an extension. And there are different ways to publish an extension, which is, let's filter it out, publish. The first common one that people mostly use, which they should not be using on at least on a production environment, is publish with debugging with a simple shortcut of F5, which means that it'll publish the extension that you're building and will also enable the debugging mode at the same time. So that kind of automatically does debugging during the development operation. The other one is publish without debugging. That means just publish the extension. I don't want to debug. The other one, which we'll be using today, is the very best one that I like during debug process, is debug without publishing. That I don't want to publish this extension that I'm in right now, but I just want to debug something. Now, this is one of the common thing that you can use the same configuration, but in the right approach, what you should be doing is add a new configuration here by using this button called add configuration, and then choose a configuration of type attach. There are two options of attach to Cloud Sandbox or attach to client to your own server, which means localhost. When you choose that, it gives you an option to choose a name, and I'll say this is my BC on-prem debug, and you can name it if you have multiple, right? Even one, you can name them. I'll just change the settings as I did earlier. I'll change the service name and I'll change this to Windows. Now these are the basic settings, but let's come down here. It says break on error, and it's an option. So it tells you when you want debugger to break. The default value is all. That means any kind of error that happens during debugging process, it should come back and give control to user or the person who is debugging. What are the other option? The other option is exclude try, which means that do not break if there is a try function, because try functions are supposed to have an error message. That's why they exist. So if you want to skip the try functions, then you use exclude try, and the none means do not break on any error. So the right value, as I've seen, is exclude try, because I surely don't want to break on a try function. Then the other option is break on record writes. Do you want to break when a record is written? Which means create, modify, or delete. That's what the MSDN definition of this parameter is. Let's see what the options are. The options are all. That means break on every record write. The second one is exclude temporary. So if in a code there is a temporary record that's being written, I don't want to break there, that you choose that. And none means do not break. So I'll choose exclude temporary. The other options are based on versions, and I'm not sure which versions they come on, so make sure it may vary based on your version. But these three settings let you see the SQL information in the debugger, and you can limit how long running SQL statement you want to set, how many statements you want to see. And then the next one is break on next. Now break on next defines when the debugger breaks. There are different options. Let's quickly watch them. The background, which applies to any background session that is running. Web client, which is for the web client. And web service client, which is for the web service or API request that's been happening. So on which kind of client type you would like to break? So surely I would like to do on web client. And then tenant is default on-prem. There are some other settings if you want to set. Application family is SaaS, so we'll talk about it later someday. SaaS, okay, port, we have said that. Anything else? Session ID, so if you have a specific session that you want to stop on, then you can give session ID. And let's quickly check about how you see your session ID. So either on-prem or SaaS, you go to help and support. On this page, you see your session ID. So in this way, you can attach your debugger to a specific session. If you don't like that, you can also attach your session to a user ID. Okay, my bad. User ID, and you can give the user ID, which can be a username or a keyword of the user, and it'll return, it'll break in case that user runs. If you don't specify the session or the user, then any next session where the error happens, it'll break. So right now, I know that there is an error message, and I would like to investigate what's happening. And I have attached configuration. So what I can do is I can do a debug without publishing. Now this option doesn't publish, it just starts the debugging, and then I'll choose my new configuration which I've created to BC on-prem debug. As soon as I choose that, you will notice that in the debugging console something is happening. It says starting a debug session with the launch configuration this, targeting this server, this service, and this tenant. It's using Windows authentication, and it says debugger will attach to the next session of type web client. So any web client session that tries to run a process and have an error message will be stopped here, and the debugger will get the control. So let's see that. I think I have an error message somewhere here on sales order release. So let's pick an open sales document and let's try to release this. Okay. As soon as I try to release this, it says nothing is there. And let me refresh this because this should have stopped. But if it did not, that means it was waiting for me to refresh that session. So, okay, let me pick one and try to release this. It still gives me an error message. That means it is not connected to my service PC230. And let's see what's happening here. PC230, Windows, exclude try, exclude temporary, and any type of web client, and the tenant is default. So it should connect to my service, but maybe it's waiting for the next one. So let me go and pop in next client here on a separate tab. As soon as I do that, it started breaking here. Okay, and there is some code because I have written the record right, so I should have removed that. So let me disconnect it, and let me say here none. I don't want to break on record right. Let's do a debug without publishing, and let's attach the scenario. Okay, so the session is connected. Let me try to pop in the client, and as it goes, it should get connected as soon as I try to do something which generates an error message. Okay, let's pick this one, try to release this. Now what happens, if you notice that my Visual Studio Code is giving me a signal that there's something happening and you need to pay attention to this. So let's go in, and it shows me an error message because the debugger have stopped on an error message. Now let's hold on here and let's understand other pieces of debugging. Let's start from the left hand panel. The first panel that you see here, let's come to this later. Let's minimize this, Let's start from call stack. A call stack shows you from begin to where you are currently in, what are the different navigation, code navigation that happens so that you reach here. So when I clicked on that button, the release action called, which then went here, so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. And then at this point on this method, there was an error message. Now a call stack, consider it as a stack where things are getting stacked up as the code is moving forward, and be removed one by one, and the code execution will reach to this point if everything works fine. Now, why I didn't talk about variable, I'll explain you now. Then you go into the variables, where you can see the global variables that you have, which are these. You can see the values of those variables at that given point of time. And you can also see the local variables in the context and the values of any field that you want. Now these global, local or database statistics, which are based on those settings, tells you how many SQL rows I've recorded, what are the different SQL commands that has been executing while things are being executing in SQL Server. So you can get a lot of details from there if you are into database statistics. But these local and global variable are based on the context in the stack that you are in. So let me explain you what I mean. If you see right now, I'm seeing something like this. When I go into code, a different area in my stack, my local variable also changes because they are related to the context where you are in. Same, my global variable will change if there is a need. So let's go here and you will see that all the local variables and their values will be reflected and saved for your need. Now, if there's something that is pretty significant for you and you would like to keep an eye on it. Let's say I would like to keep an eye on sales header document type. What I'll do is I can just copy this way one and add that into a watch section, which means I would like to watch this particular value or variable as the record processes. Or if let's say I'm interested in looking at the filters of my sales line, I can just go here and add it to watch. Now you can see what are the filters that are applied here. So you can either add it by manually typing into the watch, or you can just use the global or the local variable section and just add them into the watch. So like, do I want to watch this? Yes. And as the code will navigate and the values of these fields will change, you'll be seeing the current value as it is changing using the watch section. So now we have seen the variable section, the watch section, and the call stack section. There's this breakpoint section, which I'll explain in a while. And then there is something here on the debug console, which we'll see in a while. Debug console is equivalent to your watch. But like if you notice here, you have to expand this if there is a longer value, which does not sound like something that you would like to do when you are dealing with a lot of these kind of variables. So what you can do is you can actually type in the same way here and hit enter, which will show you the value of that field for which you had to expand this. And not just that, if this makes sense that you would like to use anything like sales header dot number, you can just copy this, paste it into the debug console. I'll show you the current value of that particular variable or the field. So it's similar to watch. It gives you more flexibility if there are longer fields that you would like to read, the value is long and you still want to read it. That's what happens. Now, while talking about debugging, there's a good concept of a breakpoint. Without the breakpoint, the debugger will always stop when there is an error, right? But if you would like to control what you are, where you want to see the different code as it is moving, let's say I want to see what happens here before it kind of runs, I need to set something called as breakpoint on that record line. Now how you set a breakpoint? Pretty simple. Two ways. Either you can use the keyboard shortcut F9, which I'm doing right now, and you see this red breakpoint here, or let's go in somewhere here. You can just come here and manually click on your mouse and create a breakpoint for you. So as I do that, I can now control the execution of this code as it'll be moving. So, okay, I think I should have something here so that I can see what's happening here. Now I've set the breakpoint, and if you have noticed, the breakpoint section have filled all the breakpoint that I've set in an object which is not related to the extension that I'm in, but the extension is allowed me to see the values of it. So for now, I'll run it and I'll pass the context back to the client. So now the user have the context, he's getting an error message. Okay, I've set it to debug, so let's try to release it again. My debugger is calling me again, so I come back here. But this time, if you see, I'm not in the error message. I'm actually on my first breakpoint because I have set the breakpoint, so the debugger actually stopped at the breakpoint that I'm in. Now comes something called as commonly known as debugger menu. This thing which you can move here and there. Now this menu helps you to do certain things, and let's understand what those things are as we move forward. The first one is continue. The continue allows you to move to either to the next error or to the next breakpoint, whichever comes first. So if I hit continue right now, I'll actually move to the next breakpoint because I have set other breakpoints. So let it hit this and see what happens. It automatically executed rest of the code and automatically stopped me at the breakpoint which I have set after that particular earlier breakpoint. The next one is a step over. Now for a step over, let me give you an example here. Okay, so let's talk about a step into. Step into means you're taking a step at a time. So you are going each step one at a time. So when I get into this, what will happen? I'll call this. Now this is a function. If I hit step over, it'll skip the execution of this function and move ahead. And not just this ahead, it'll move to the possible next breakpoint. But I hit step into, it'll get into this method. So let's hit step into, see what happens. It took me inside that method from where I came from. Now there's a lot of code. If you think that this is not causing the problem, you can actually skip it, right? But let's see, we'll skip this, we'll see this. So I get into, okay, now this is an event, so the step into will take me to the event call if there is one. Okay, now going forward, I'm stepping into, it is moving line by line, and somewhere here there was this call to this method called test sales payment, which took me to this test sales payment. Now looking at it, I know this is not causing the problem, but how I get out? You have a friend called step out, which steps you out from the sub function back to the calling function. So as soon as I hit there, I should come somewhere here back. So let's hit step out and I come back here. So I've left the code that is being executed in that sub function just by using step out. Let's go down. And now it's calling check sales header pending approval. Now if I do step into, I'll surely go into this method and I'll execute each and every line of code. What I want to do is, I'm pretty sure I know that this is not causing the problem, so I can do a step over. I'll actually move directly here and the code will automatically execute within this. So whatever the code is here, I know that is not causing the problem, so I can do a step over. And a step into is just line by line. Now at this point, if I do a step into, I'll get into this code unit. If I do a step out, and there is no breakpoint defined inside this, it'll take me outside this and to this point. And if I do a step over and there are no breakpoint, I'll come to this. But I know that I have breakpoints inside this, So whatever I do, I'll have to hit the next breakpoint. So let's do step over, and I actually come into that. So I came from here and I reach to that code unit because there was a breakpoint. Whatever I would have clicked there, I would have reached here, other than step into, which would have also taken me to this line. Hopefully this is getting clear as we are talking about. And as we do this, now this is a method in the sales header table. I know this is not causing the problem, or there's nothing happening here, so I'll just skip this. Then it is code. Let's get into it. And as we move forward, I notice that, oh, okay, this is something that I didn't see earlier, but on before release of the sales doc, there is a event available which is doing something, and I don't know what it is doing. So this is e-document subscriber, so I know this is Microsoft code, so that should not cause a problem. Let's go back, let's give in. Okay, I don't want to see this. Let's move ahead, step over. Okay, sell to customer number handled. Okay, check sales line. Now I notice that the check sales line will test some of the sales line, and that's where my error was, something in this area somewhere in this method. So if I go down, I see that I got the error message last time when I ran it from this area. So that means something is happening here. So I'm already paying attention to my sales line dot filter. So right now if I look at my, and it remembers the history just by up arrow, it is currently out of scope, so there is no value to it. Okay, so let's come down. Okay, Microsoft did set some filters, and now if I look at it, it shows me the sales line already have a filter of document type order, document number, type is greater than blank, and quantity is not equal to 0. As soon as I step in, I see that there is an event subscriber written, which is setting up a filter for a field called brand code not equal to being blank. Okay. Now at this point, if I check the value of my sales line dot filter, I see that there is a new filter added called brand code not equal to blank. Okay. So as I move ahead, it checks and it gives me an error. So something related to my sales line having a brand code blank is generating this error message. So I say, okay, I know what's happening. Let's go back. Let's give it control back to user. And on this document, let's see what the brand code looks like. When I open my sales order document, I see that there's a brand code field which is not filled in. Okay. Remember, the debugger is still on. So now if I try to release this, it'll still stop me because I have the breakpoint set. But this time I'm pretty sure I just directly know where my issue is. So I'll just move there and see what's happening. Okay, so the set filter is done. Okay, let's see what the values of my filters are. Right now it's only quantity, so let's call this. Now what's the value now? Let's change the brand code. Let's move next, and there is no error. So it kind of moved out of that sequence because now I know what was the error and why this was being called. If I let it continue, it'll do that. Anyone on the call or listening to this, if you know how to use restart, just let me know. I was not able to figure it out. From my perspective, I don't think we can use the restart other than it just clears the debug console, it seems, and that's it, I guess. Nothing else. Okay. It doesn't do anything else other than the debug console being clear. And then the last button here is disconnect, which disconnects my debugging session, and I'm back to my development mode. So this is how you do a pretty basic debugging in Business Central for your AL code. There are other situations and we'll talk about it in the upcoming videos, like how you deal with other extension, what other extension developers can limit you while you're debugging process, and how you actually debug the code that you have. And also we'll talk about other type of debugging like snapshot debugging, what is snap point and all. But what is the homework for you? Do let me know your questions into the chat. Whatever you think about this video, do let your views into the comment section of this video. I love to read them and try to answer as much as I can. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, do hit that. There'll be more and more video coming into this channel as we go forward. And if you think that this is interesting and other people should know about it, then hit the share button and share it with your colleagues and friends. Till then, have a great day, and I'll see you next time sooner than later. Thank you.